Gospel icon Donnie McClurkin, 64, broke his silence with a revelation that left his fans in tears, shock, and heartbreak. He has provided the vocals for some of the most impactful gospel tunes for many years. He has been keeping a very personal secret for years, but now he is speaking out about it. Even his closest religious friends were taken aback by what he disclosed, and it has left everyone wondering, how could a very religious guy bear such suffering on his own for so long? The emotional reality behind Donnie McClurkin's startling admission is going to be revealed to you. A tale that delves deeply into faith, adversity, and redemption that transcends both music and celebrity. Donnie McClurkin has long been regarded as one of the most prestigious and significant voices in gospel music. Millions of people all across the world have found solace in his songs, such as "Stand, We Fall Down" and "Great Is Your Mercy." He has stood next to some of the most well-known figures in ministry, preached on the largest stages, and established a legacy based on tenacity and worship. However, there has always been more to the narrative behind the lights, the fame, and the accolades. Donnie himself has only just made the decision to publicly address it. McClurkin recently revealed something shocking to his fans that left many stunned at the age of 64. Known for being candid about his past hardships and spiritual journey, his statements this time had a weight that none had anticipated. It had nothing to do with success, not with music. It focused on his struggles, personal life, and the emotional wounds that continue to influence him to this day. Donnie didn't hold back when he spoke. He discussed his loneliness, his internal conflicts that had plagued him for decades, and his doubts about ever finding true love. Even though God has given him a fantastic ministry and a worldwide following, he acknowledged that a part of him still feels empty. Fans and other gospel musicians have responded in spades to this unvarnished emotional honesty. It's regarded by many as one of his most vulnerable periods. Others think it's his method of drawing attention to something the church frequently ignores: the unsaid suffering that many Christians endure while hiding behind their religious facade. We'll go over Donnie McClurkin's entire confession, why it's rocking the gospel community, and how it relates to his past struggles, such as trauma, faith issues, and the price of being open in a field that demands perfection, in this video. As we go into the context of Donnie's remarks, you'll see that his words have the potential to completely alter our perception of one of the greatest living legends in gospel. The voice that would change nations was first heard by the globe when Donnie McClurkin was a young child from Amityville, New York. Long before he ever found a microphone, the youngster experienced heartbreak. His journey starts in the quiet, sad corners of his boyhood home rather than on the big stages or in the spotlight. Donnie had through a string of terrible experiences when she was young that would affect her for the rest of her life. When the tragedy first occurred, he was just 8 years old. An automobile struck and murdered his sibling, who was 2 years old. His childhood innocence was shattered by the incident, which also started a series of traumas that would affect him far into adulthood. However, the suffering didn't end there. Donnie has discussed experiencing sexual abuse as a child in a number of interviews. By his uncle first, and then by his uncle's son. He was left broken, bewildered, and looking for solace in a world that provided none as a result of these terrible experiences. He once said that I was only a child, and that my innocence had been taken from me. He clarified that a large portion of the emotional turmoil he has experienced throughout his life was influenced by these early traumas. On the heart, he was still struggling with the memories of those dark years, but on the outside, the world saw a powerful, charismatic man of faith. Furthermore, the scars persisted long after he was saved and healed by Christ. Music became his haven when he was a teenager. The church served as his haven, a place where he could sing about his suffering and find comfort in the presence of God. His voice soon became well known throughout the town after he joined the church choir. His voice was described as anointed, powerful, and healing, and people would come only to hear him sing. Few, however, were aware of the gravity of that voice. His music's soul-stirring intensity came from the years of trauma that drew him closer to God. Donnie has frequently stated that he would not know where he would be if it weren't for music. The gospel gave him a reason to live, and the church gave him a purpose. The ache did not, however, go away. Beneath the music, the preaching, and the smiles, it remained. Donnie encountered a different kind of obstacle as he grew older, one that would bring him not only notoriety but also controversy. He was unexpectedly forced into the spotlight when his musical career took off in the 1980s and 1990s. The youngster who used to sing as a way to cope with his misery was suddenly hailed as one of the most vibrant new voices in gospel. Around the world, he was ministering, recording, and touring. His songs, such as Stand and We Fall Down, became anthems for everybody who was having a hard time hanging on. However, despite his rising fame, he still struggled with emotional isolation and loneliness in private. Fame doesn't fill the void, Donnie has stated. It merely intensifies the quiet. He felt more pressure to conceal the aspects of his life that didn't conform to the ideal of a gospel star the more people admired him. His life was defined by the conflict between suffering in secret and being praised in public. And his new confession is so potent because of that same conflict. Because the tale of Donnie McClurkin's religion has always been entwined with the story of his suffering. He became the guy he is today because of his early experiences with pain, rejection, and loss. Both the fragile soul we hardly ever hear about and the worship leader we see on stage. Donnie wasn't just talking for himself when he sat down to talk about his issues with identity, love, and loneliness. Millions of individuals who feel invisible in the church and who cry every night but smile every Sunday were given a voice by him. He stated something in his confession that resonated with everyone who heard it. Even if you lead thousands of people, sing and preach, you will still feel totally alone. More than just pain was shown by their remarks. They showed a guy who had dedicated his life to balancing his humanity with his mission. The next part of this story starts when Donnie chose to talk about his personal troubles in public, despite knowing that doing so would rock the gospel world to its foundation. One of the most revered names in gospel music for many years has been Donnie McClurkin. Millions have been inspired by this man's ability and testimony. However, he revealed something that nobody anticipated at the age of 64. Neither a new song nor a new album was released. It was a confession that would leave followers and fellow believers in disbelief as it revealed a very human truth beneath all the layers of celebrity and perfection. It started when Donnie sat down to consider his life and legacy during an emotional interview. His voice cracked as he described his adventure. Raw honesty took the place of his normal assurance. Then he uttered the words that took everyone by surprise. "I might pass away by myself." The gospel community was rocked by those 4 words. The man who had taught millions about faith, healing, and restoration, Donnie McClurkin, was acknowledging that, in spite of his accomplishments, he still battled loneliness and the fear that he would never find true love or connection. He continued by saying that although his life has been full of blessings and purpose, it has also been full of silence, the type that settles in when the cheering stops. "I have experience in ministry. I come home to an empty house even though I've traveled the world," he said. "I have friends and family, but I lack the life companion and spouse that most people desire. I've come to terms with the fact that perhaps that isn't my tale." This statement touched a distinct chord with a man who has always been candid about his troubles. This was no ordinary testimony. It was a cry from the heart of a person who had sacrificed everything for God, including his time, career, and voice, and who was still waiting for some requests to be answered. The fact that Donnie had previously talked about his inner struggles added to the emotional impact of this occasion. He has been open about his previous trauma, his struggles with temptation, and his complex relationship with identity and love over the years. However, he didn't sound like he was struggling this time. It was a capitulation. He was not looking for understanding or sympathy. All he was doing was being honest. His words were, "I'm not bitter. I've discovered that some people are called to serve God in ways that don't always involve starting a family of their own. I'm grateful. That might be my task." Nevertheless, many people who have followed his path were moved to tears when they heard him say those words. Social media was inundated with heartfelt posts from fans who expressed how his candor caused them to consider their own difficulties. One admirer commented, "It reminded me that even our heroes are human, even though it broke my heart." Other gospel musicians also voiced their support and respect. According to Tasha Cobbs Leonard, Donnie's ministry is so effective because of his bravery in being open and honest. His vulnerability served as a lesson for the entire gospel community, according to Kirk Franklin and Marvin Sapp, who complimented his strength. Others, however, voiced concern, while many gave compassion and understanding. Some others wonder if Donnie's remarks revealed a deeper emotional tiredness, the kind that results from decades of giving your all to other people without receiving anything in return. Donnie said in the interview that he had struggled with that emptiness. He remarked, "I talk to God the most and cry when I wonder what I have after the music stops and the lights go out and no one is there in the room." He also talked candidly about the strain that comes with being well known, particularly in the church. He believed he had to live up to a standard of spiritual perfection for years. He was unable to display loneliness, weakness, or the ability to acknowledge when he was in pain. "People look at you and think you have it all," he stated, "but they don't see the nights when you're praying just to make it through." Donnie McClurkin's honest, unvarnished, and agonizingly genuine confession showed a side of him that few had before seen. It served as a reminder to everyone that, despite their outward strength, people nonetheless require grace, compassion, and understanding. However, Donnie didn't abandon his listeners in hopelessness. He returned the discussion to faith in typical McClurkin fashion. He said, "I'm never truly alone. God has been faithful, and He's been my companion through it all. My life may not look like I imagined, but it's still full of purpose." Millions of people were moved by his admission of loneliness while holding fast to faith. People's hearts weren't broken by the confession itself. It was the peace and humility with which he gave it. Because Donnie McClurkin chose honesty in a society when image is everything. He chose vulnerability in a culture that values perfection. And it is the reason his story is so potent. It's about strength, not weakness. It takes a certain type of strength to acknowledge that despite all the years, miracles, and achievements, he is still a human being who is still developing and still believes in God's plan. However, it's not the whole tale. Because Donnie's next statement, which revealed why he feels God hasn't yet let him find love, caught everyone off guard and sparked a deeper discussion on purpose, calling, and the cost of ministry. Many admirers thought Donnie McClurkin's admission of loneliness and the possibility that he would die alone was just a personal confession, a vulnerable moment from a man who is known for his courage. However, what followed showed something much more profound. Donnie talked about more than just loneliness. He clarified why he thinks it has stayed a consistent aspect of his path, and his justification evolved into one of the most profound insights he has ever offered. Donnie stated in follow-up interview and a number of emotional writings that he sees being single as a calling rather than a misfortune. "I thought there was something wrong with me," he remarked. "But as time went on, I began to realize that perhaps God hadn't denied me love. I used to pray and ask God, why can't I have what everyone else has? Why can't I find someone to share my life with?" Perhaps he was shielding me from an invisible threat. Finding the wrong person for Donnie wasn't the only issue here. It was about realizing that every painful incident, unsolved question, and sleepless night in his life had a purpose. God keeps certain things away from us, he said at times, to put us in a position, not to punish us. He clarified that he has previously come dangerously close to settling for unsatisfactory partnerships. He acknowledged that there were moments when I tried to make anything work merely to avoid being alone myself. However, I knew in my heart that it wasn't God's will. I often ended myself confused or heartbroken when I tried to do things my own way. Then he stopped and said something that made the whole room go silent. "I've realized that perhaps seclusion was necessary for my calling. Perhaps the first needed to travel this journey by myself, in order for people who share my sentiments to hear me." The tone of everything was altered by that sentence. Donnie had stopped talking about himself. Millions of people who felt abandoned, rejected, or forgotten were the audience for his speech. Those who prayed for company but instead experienced protracted periods of solitude. Being alone does not necessarily indicate that you have been abandoned. Rather, it may indicate that you have been selected for something more significant, he said to them. And ministry has always been the bigger thing for Donnie. God understood that the time and effort I devote to other people may have divided my focus. So he stated, "If I had been married, I don't know if I could have poured into people the way I have. Perhaps he did this to help me stay focused. However, he didn't sound like a man who had just come to terms with his lot in life. His tone had depth and a calmness that only comes from years of struggling with God. In the end, I recognized that everything I went through, every heartbreak, every failure has formed my ministry, he said. I've grieved, I've asked questions, I've even grumbled. Donnie also thought about how his own struggles became part of his testimony. When people hear me sing or we fall down, they're not just hearing lyrics, they're hearing my life. Those songs came from places of pain, loneliness, and surrender. It taught me compassion for people who hurt quietly and made me more sensitive to those who feel invisible. That's why they connect with people the way they do. He continued by saying that he prayed to God for clarity during one of his most trying times, remembering to say, "Lord, if I meant to walk alone, then give me peace about it." He said that peace did come, but not all at once. It occurred gradually, he said, in moments when I understood that my fulfillment depended on my mission and not on anybody else. More remarkable is the fact that Donnie sees his journey as redemptive rather than tragic, saying, "I don't see my singleness as a failure. It seems like an assignment to me. If helping others find recovery means that I have to pay the price of loneliness, then so be it, because I've discovered that God never wastes pain." That statement alone chilled fans and followers. It's a viewpoint that only someone who has experienced the fire could have. It turns loneliness from a burden into a ministry. Many people who have followed Donnie for years are aware that his life hasn't been easy. He has openly discussed childhood trauma, faith issues, and times of spiritual warfare. The same God who saw me through the darkest valleys is the same God who walks with me now. I may not have a partner, but I have purpose. And that's more than enough. He said something that struck a deep chord with believers worldwide. Despite everything, he has managed to stay steadfast, grounded, and anchored in hope. People from a variety of backgrounds, including pastors, widows, single mothers, and even young adults, started to share how Donnie's story resonated with them. Many claimed that it reassured them that being alone doesn't equate to being unimportant. One fan wrote, "I've been single for years and used to feel like I was missing out. I'm not missing out though after hearing Donnie. I'm being shaped." Another said, "Donnie just taught a complete sermon with that one sentence. God doesn't waste sorrow." Donnie McClurkin is one of the most likable and well-respected gospel musicians. Because of his openness, he doesn't only sing about winning. His confession didn't end there though, as Donnie also disclosed that he has a spiritual explanation for his self-control. "Every time I thought I found love, something in my spirit wouldn't settle. I don't understand it now, but when I prayed, God would whisper, 'Not this one.' He was keeping me from becoming sidetracked and losing sight of my goal." Despite this knowledge, the agony of loneliness persisted. The conflict between faith and longing is what defines Donnie McClurkin's journey, he acknowledged. "Even now, there are nights when I glance at the empty side of the bed and wonder if I missed something. But then, I remember every step I've taken has been ordered." But what really moved people was what transpired after that confession, because Donnie didn't just talk about what he's lost, he also shared what he's gained in return. And that's what makes his testimony so powerful. He doesn't pretend that faith erases pain. Instead, he demonstrates that faith gives pain a purpose. And perhaps his most motivational insight comes in the next section of his tale.